everyone, this is Vinit Mehta. In this video, I'll be discussing about the exam prep strategy one should have 60 days away from the exam. I'll be discussing about two situations. Situation 1, where the student has just started their preparation, and situation 2, where the student has started their preparation a month ago. For those who have started their preparation a month ago or so, you can jump to the timestamp mentioned in the description. Nonetheless, you could just continue if you feel like. Now, in my years of teaching and mentoring CFA students, I've come across a situation where they are entirely excited, motivated, and high spirited to continue or to start their journey. But here's the question, they are always confused on how to begin their journey. So, accordingly, I'll be covering the questions which I preempt you would have. Questions such as, which subject should you start with? What should be the order of subjects you should follow? There are 10 subjects in CFA level 1. Another question is how many hours to dedicate for every subject, and by when you should complete your first full study of all the 10 subjects, how many revisions to have, when to solve the practice exam questions, and the most important question which a student has is what should be given the most priority? Should they focus most on reading or should they focus most on practicing exam questions? All these questions I'll be answering or covering in these videos. But here's the thing. Why do we need to plan and strategize? I mean, let's go random, take any subject you want, do practice questions whenever you feel like. I could tell you reasons such as, there are 10 subjects which are being tested there's in a particular day, and many other reasons which could just scare you and give you anxiety. But rather, we are doing all these things so that we pass in the exam with a very good score. You remember, always do things for the right reasons. And this is how your future and your result would look like. If you observe, the red color dotted line is a minimum passing score. You would be basically above that red line. If you're above the black dotted line over here, in that case, you are basically above the 90th percentile. To get this score, you have to ensure that you are scoring above 70% in each and every subject. And when I say 70%, that means if you are being asked 10 questions for a particular subject, you have to make sure that 7 to 8 questions are correct. That's what we are aiming for. And keeping that in mind, we need to start executing our plan and strategy. But to get this result, the most important thing is you need to know how the exam would look like. And this particular slide exactly talks about that. Your exam will be of roughly 4 to 5 hours, depending upon the kind of amount of break you take. Session number 1 will be of 2 hours and 15 minutes. And so will be session number 2, 2 hours and 15 minutes. In each session, they will ask you 90 questions. These are MCQ, multiple choice questions. For every question, you will have option A, B, and C, and you are supposed to select the correct one. Here's how session 1 will be tested. There are 10 subjects, and 10 subjects, out of 10 subjects, 5 subjects will be tested in session 1. Which are those? Ethics, quants, economics, corporate issuer, and FSA. The remaining 5 subjects will be tested after the break time, which is portfolio management, equity, fixed income, derivatives, and alternative investments. But here's the thing, when they ask you questions about ethics, you will know that these are the questions about ethics. But for the remaining 4 subjects, they could ask you these questions in the jumbled up manner. For example, you could have first question on quants, second question on economics, third question on FSA, fourth question on corporate issuer, fifth question on corporate issuer, and so on. I guess you got the drill. Basically, these questions, questions for these subjects will be in a jumbled up manner. Similarly, in session 2, you will clearly understand there are separate questions for portfolio management, but the questions amongst equity, fixed income, derivatives, and alternative will be jumbled up. So you need to know the exam format and you need to practice accordingly. And we'll talk about that at a later point in time. Nonetheless, should we just focus on all the subjects equally? Well, it depends upon the weight they are giving in the exam. If you observe, the weights are out of 180 questions, 90 plus 90. So if they say that the weightage of ethics is, let's say, 15 to 20%, that means, let's say for example 20%, that means 20% of 180. That means 36 questions are expected for ethics, roughly, maybe 25 to 36 in that range. Similarly, quants, economics, and corporate issuer are given the least amount of weightage. The highest weightage is basically ethics. Second most important are FSA, equity, and fixed income, if you observe over here. Then basically which follows the suit is the alternative investments, portfolio management. Then there are quants, economics, and ethics, and in last there is derivatives. This is how the weightage of the exam is. Why do you need to know this? So that we know when to focus and how much to focus. So this is what your exam would look like. Now there are 10 subjects which are tested in the exam. Imagine if there is a situation where you could complete all the 10 subjects just 3 days before the exam. Here's how we can do it. There are roughly about 70 to 85 chapters in level 1, depending upon which year you are and how they have designed the syllabus, but roughly it is in the range of 70 to 85 chapters. At the end of every chapter, there are summary notes. These summary notes are of 2 or 3 pages each, depending upon the book you read. But in either case, if you do the math, the total turns out to be roughly in the range of 170 to 200 pages. Let's say 200 pages. An average student closer to the exam is able to read 10 pages in 1 hour. If you do the math, you'll realize that the total turns out to be 20 hours. I mean, even if you give a separate timeline for ethics, maybe let's say 2 days, you can complete 10 subjects in last 4 days. Why am I talking about this? Here's the thing. On the exam day, what matters the most is your state of mind. Thinking that you have done 10 subjects in 3 to 4 days time will boost your level of confidence and thus might have a positive impact on your exam. Second of all, there's something called a short-term memory which gets boosted. There could be certain concepts which might have skimmed through and did not understand thoroughly. If you read these 10 subjects and if you read those concepts closer to the exam, there is something called a short-term memory and it might just get boosted and might just come handy. The point is, I don't know if you realize, the way I'm suggesting you plan and strategize is always think about the outcome, then think about the performance day, and then think about how closer would you be to the performance day. In this case, the last 5 days before the exam. Now to ensure this, we have to make sure that our first reading, whenever we are reading, whatever it could be, you could be starting 60 days before the exam or whatever, 100 days before the exam. This is how we need to do our first reading. And this is the order in which I would suggest you to go through the subjects. The order which I'm suggesting doesn't change whether you're starting your preparation today or whether you're starting your preparation maybe 100 days before the exam. First and foremost, I would suggest you to do a time value of money, then FSA, then equity, fixed income, derivatives, alternative, portfolio management, quants, corporate finance, and economics. This is the order which I would suggest. Here's the logic behind it and the number of time it would take for you to complete. The first and foremost, if you observe, let me take you through the entire slide. The red colored boxes are the weights which are there in the exam. So I have designed this flow keeping in mind the importance of these subjects and also keeping in mind the complications and the time it takes. If you observe, below every subject I mentioned the number of hours which would roughly take for anybody to read these subjects for the first time. I have captured that. So keeping that in mind, here's the logic behind it. I would suggest you to start with time value of money. Now this time value of money is the basic content. Basics of time value of money. Here what you will learn is not just the time value of money, but you will also learn how to use a financial calculator which is very unique to CFA exams. So it is very important that you spend this time. This is 6 hours. You could, if you're not comfortable, you can stretch it to let's say 9 hours. Where do you get this material? This material, the basic material, is not there in the official syllabus or the official curriculum. If you go to the pre-read book, pre-read or prerequisite readings of quantitatives, it is there freely available on CFA website, especially it is available to the candidates. So you will get that material over there and you can get as many practice questions, the basic ones, from there. This is very critical. Although it is not tested in the exam, but it will help you understand all the subjects. For example, one of the chapters of FSA requires you to have the basic understanding of time value of money, the lease accounting. So you need to know the time value of money before you start FSA. Thereafter, I would suggest you to start FSA. FSA is the second most important subject across all the 10 subjects after ethics. FSA also takes a good amount of time, roughly in the range of 35 to 45 hours, depending upon your background. If you are a non-commerce or a non-accounting student, you will need to give more time over here. If you are a commerce or an accounting student, your initial chapters of FSA will go a little faster. Nonetheless, what I'm suggesting is roughly in the range of 35 to 45 hours. Thereafter, I would suggest you to start with equity. Now, equity, although it says equity and you would expect everything about equity, here's the thing. The first 3 chapters are focusing more on the financial markets. So the beautiful part is it gives you a bird's eye view of the entire financial market, not just equity, but even debt, fixed income, even derivatives, etc. So I would suggest you to start with those 3 chapters. And then the remaining chapters within the equity talks about equity, Again, the good part is, although there are a good number of chapters, like 6 to 8, but the number of time required will be less, 25 hours or so. Now that you've understood the capital markets and you also understood equity, understanding fixed income is the next best thing you could do. Again, The weightage of FSA, equity and fixed income is pretty much the same, and that's why I'm suggesting you to focus that more first. Fixed income is a little challenging. In fact, it is very interesting, let me put it this way, but it will also require you to spend more number of hours. And that's why fixed income, because if you take difficult and the most important subjects earlier, you would be less stressed, less anxious about how your preparation journey is going. Of course, there is one particular thing where maybe 20 days into the preparation, you would be like, oh, okay, 3-4 subjects are only done out of 10. But realize the remaining subjects like derivatives, alternative portfolio management will happen within a matter of few days. So I would suggest you to take up the challenging ones first. Now, after fixed income, I would suggest you to start derivatives, because to understand derivatives better, it is important that you understand fixed income well, and it is also equally important that you have an understanding of equity, what are indexes, etc., etc., etc. And now that you've understood equity, fixed income, and derivatives, understanding alternative investment becomes a little better and gives you a better perspective. In fact, there is one section within alternative investment which talks about hedge funds, and hedge funds, they also you make use of derivatives. So it will be a better understanding. It will fold well into alternative investments. Only then after, I would suggest you to basically start with portfolio management. What is portfolio management? You are investing in different asset classes. What are asset classes? Equity, fixed income, derivatives. So you've understood all these things, and thereafter, understanding how to build a portfolio becomes a little better. Thereafter, once you're done with portfolio, I would suggest you to start with quants. Now here's the thing, typically most of the people straight away start with their quantitatives, and then they do FSA and all. But the reason why I'm putting it, 7th or 6th in the order is because A, it has got the least amount of weightage, 6 to 9%. But another thing is, in my experience, I have come across students where they understand concepts of statistics separately, but they are not able to apply it somewhere. For example, what would be the probability for when you're forecasting an EPS? What would be the probability of a return? Or what could be the distribution of returns? Or what could be the hypothesis, or how do you apply regression? So if you do quantitative 6th or 7th in the order, it will start making more of a sense to you. So only if you've understood all these financial concepts, how do you use statistics to apply on these financial concepts will become much better for you. And hence I'm suggesting quantitative 7th in the order. Second of all, it's because it's challenging. Imagine this way, if you read closer to the exam, you'll be able to retain more. So yeah, corporate finance, again, it's the least important weightage, and also takes the least amount of time. So corporate finance you could do probably second last in the order, and economics, again, last in the order. Now later I will also talk about where you can combine subjects. Like there are certain or huge section of students who are not comfortable reading one subject throughout the day. They just want to mix and match, and that I will talk about that. For example, subjects like corporate finance and economics, you can combine it with, let's say, equity and fixed income or FSA. That's how I would suggest, or maybe portfolio management or alternative. You can combine some of these topics. So it's up to you, but I would suggest you to first pick up these subjects, and I hope this is convincing enough. For all these 10 subjects, it would roughly take you 250 to 300 hours for reading it for the first time. These numbers are on a conservative side. I have considered notes which are popularly used by all the students, and that's why I would suggest you to take, it would roughly take 250 to 300 hours. And by the way, don't forget, ethics is the most important one, but it is also a dry subject. And that's why I would recommend you to read ethics 1 or 2 hours daily. From where you should read it? There are many notes which are available, but because ethics is the most important topic for CFA, I would insist you to read it from where CFA has, officially captured. It's in their curriculum. It's the longest, and that's why I've given 1 to 2 hours daily. If you were to read from other notes, that would probably you'll be able to do it in 2 to 3 days. It's your call, but I would insist you to read it from curriculum, because CFA Institute is not okay if you do not know ethics at all. It is very important that you know ethics very well. So here's the thing, ethics, give 1 to 2 hours daily. Now let's talk about what would be the preparation strategy of a student who is 60 days away from the exam and has recently started or about to start. As I told you about how the 5 days should look like, based on that, this is what we would do it. A student who is 60 days away from the exam, I would suggest them to dedicate 50 hours roughly in the first 35 to 40 days. If you dedicate 50 hours a week, you'll be able to complete a syllabus in roughly 35 days. But if you dedicate 45 hours a week, In that case, you'll be able to complete a syllabus in roughly 40 days time. Because remember, you need to spend 250 to 300 hours depending upon how well you are placed. If you are able to do this, then you'll be basically in a very good position in 35 to 40 days from now. Trust me about it. But here's the thing, how does 50 years week look like? This is what I would suggest you. Your daily schedule probably would look something or should look something like that, so as you are able to achieve the maximum, the target. Complete the syllabus of reading in 35 to 40 days. Every day, the way you do your brushing, I would insist you to read the summary notes for 30 minutes. Why summary notes? Recall, I told you, if you are able to read these summary notes now, it will be very easy for you to recall closer to the exam. Remember, I told you, you can complete 10 subjects in 3 days. Summary notes. To make sure that happens in the last 3 days, you have to make sure that you read those summary notes right now. So make sure you're reading summary notes every day 30 minutes of the subjects or the topics which you have learned before. 30 minutes for practice exam questions. Now this is possible only once you have completed a subject. It's a little impossible when you have not completed a subject. So let's say you take 5 days or 7 days time for completing FSA or equity. Thereafter, I would suggest you to start practice exam questions. 30 minutes every day so that you get a sense about it. If you dedicate 30 minutes, you'll be able to solve 40 to 50 questions, maybe 40 questions. If you're able to ensure that you're able solving 40 to 50 questions daily, in that case, if you do the math, across 50 days, you'll be able to do 2,500 questions, which is a good number, trust me. Most of the people who have cleared CFA L1 with good scores, they definitely make sure that they reach around that number, 2,500 questions. And as I told you, ethics you need to do daily, 1 or 2 hours. So I've given you 1 or 1.5 hours of ethics. If you do the math, the total is close to 2 or 2.5 hours daily for all these things. You need to make sure that you are following this no matter what. This is more like you're doing your regular course. Thereafter, you have to take out time for reading new topics because you're reading it for the first time. I would suggest you to take a challenging subject and take a comfortable subject and read it in the combination. If you're a working professional, I would suggest you to dedicate 4 to 5 hours daily in addition to these 2 hours. So that means I'm asking you to read for 6 hours. I know it's difficult, but I'll talk about that in some time. But if you're a full-time student, voila, you are lucky. You can dedicate 5 to 6 hours for the new subjects to read in addition to the other couple of hours. Why? Because we are 60 days away from the exam. It's very important that we push that pedal really hard. If you're a working professional, you might wonder, how am I able to complete 6 hours on a daily basis? You may not be able to do it, but then you need to stretch your weekends. By the way, if you're working from office and you're traveling, please use that traveling time. Maybe to read the summary notes, maybe to solve practice questions or something like that. But you'll also have to stretch on weekends. That also means that you will not be able to take your weekend breaks as usual. You'll probably have to take those breaks maybe every 10 days. Think about it that way. Or maybe every 15 days, as much as you mentally can stretch. If you're working from home, you can juggle weekdays, because you can wake up a little early. If there is some lull time between your work, you could just kind of take that and read about it. And of course, you need to stretch weekends. And if you're a full-time student, lucky you, make sure you take a very good advantage of this situation. So this is how I would suggest your daily schedule will look like. Now, here's some of the tricks which I would suggest you to keep in mind when you're preparing. Focus on the LOS of each reading assignment. For example, there could be an LOS which says that you need to interpret skewness and you need to interpret kurtosis, and then there is a formula given. There's no point of understanding the formula because LOS requires only you to interpret it. You don't have to get into the details of understanding the formula. So try to focus on all these things, what the LOS is really asking you to know. If you, as far as you have achieved that objective, you're sorted and you're covered up for the exam. Read the summary every time. I think emphasize enough why you need to read the summary every time. Here's the thing which I come across most of the students. When they complete these 10 subjects across the span of 35 to 40 days, on the 41st day when they are starting their revision, they are completely lost, they are completely anxious because they do not recall everything. It's human to forget. So that you do not forget, I'm asking you to read the summary notes every 7 days since the completion. So if you completed your, let's say, a particular subject on 10th of a particular month, you should make sure that you're revising the summary, those subjects through the summary notes, maybe on the 17th day of the month, after the 7 days of the completion. Make sure you do that. And that's why I'm again asking you to read summary notes on a daily basis. Solve question banks on a daily basis and solve one mock exam every week once you are completed all the 10 subjects. So you would be getting a lot of mock exams, and I'm sure you must be having an access to that. Make sure you solve one mock exam every week and try to solve these mock exams in exam like session. One session is of 2 hours and 15 minutes. So do not get up in 2 hours and 15 minutes even if you have to go and pee. Avoid taking water at that point in time. So make sure that you are giving those mock exams in an exam like situation. Now that I've spoken enough about what you should do in the first 35 to 40 days of your preparation, especially when you're 60 days away from the exam, let me talk about how would you manage when you're revising it. By the way, this aspect is also applicable for those who are planning to revise. How would you revise and the order of it? The number of hours changes. If you notice, I have basically given only 120 to 130 hours because you just need that much amount of hours. 120 to 130 hours of all the 10 subjects together. Again, do not forget the basics. Summary notes, practice questions, and ethics on a daily basis. Now you're 20 days away from the exam, and it is very important that you put in more number of hours. In here, you probably must put in for 50 hours a week, but now I'm insisting you to put 60 hours a week. Again, even if you're a working professional, there is a bright possibility that you are on a study leave. And if you are on a study leave, make sure you use that at your advantage. Now, out of the remaining 20 days, because the last 5 days are going for the last minute revisions, you just have 15 days left. Now 15 days to cover 130 hours, it is only possible if you do 10 hours a day, which probably might be a little difficult. So here's the thing what I'm suggesting. Do only those concepts and those subjects which are of highest weightage. For example, if you're doing FSA, income statement chapter, you don't need to go through every small details of income statement chapter. Take up the important LOSs, and I'll talk about that at the end of the video. So make sure you do those only, so that this is more like a smart reading. We are just, placing our bets on the most important topics. By the way, when you are reading over here, when you're revising over here, because you're closer to the exam, I would insist you to read important topics closer to the exam. Like corporate issuer and economics are less important. Read it 20 days away from the exam. But FSA, ethics, FSA, equity, they are important. So read it closer to the exam. Why? Because again, short-term memory, it might just get boosted. And if you're doing that, make sure you solve all these things which I've anyway spoken about it. So now that I've spoken about how would a person who was just starting their preparation for CFA Level 1 for the first time, this is how it probably would look like, the entire 60-day journey. For those who have already started and halfway through, for them, again, I would suggest the same order, but here, because you've already started maybe a month ago or something like that, you just need 150 to 170 hours, my bet, for first time reading the remaining subjects, and again, which is next 20 to 25 days. And if you're able to complete your first full reading in next 25 days, that means you have 35 days remaining for the exam. That means you could probably do more readings or more revisions, 50 hours, 60 hours, 20 days, and the last 10 days. So you have 35 days, so 20 days for the first revision, another 10 days for the second revision, because it kind of helps a lot. Now I've been insisting, or I've been talking about, that you focus on the high weightage and the difficult topics closer to the exam. Now the question is, what are those high weightage and the difficult topics every subject wise? Next slide is talking exactly about that. If you read this slide, there are red colors, there are black colors, and there are green and white colors. The red color subjects are the highest weightage subject. The important topics or important concepts within each subject are something like this. Now again, this is just my guess, but it's an educated guess. Income statement, it's everything you need to go through. In balance sheet, you just need to go through financial assets and marketable securities accounting, because rest everything else is covered in long-term assets, inventory, long-term liabilities, etc, 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 which I would insist you to cover everything. Cash flow statement 1 and 2, again, it's very important, you need to cover everything. All the ratios within analytical tools and topics chapter. Forecasting technique is little important because it's recently added in 2024 in your syllabus, so I would insist you to go through that. Fixed income, out of 19 chapters, I would insist you to read roughly around 10 to 12 chapters, which is chapter number 6 to 13 and chapter number 17 to 19. Within equity, again, I have mentioned what are the important topics. Derivatives, entire topic, nothing optional. Especially make sure that in derivatives, you are understanding the no arbitrage pricing and related aspects for forward contract, futures contract, options, FRA, interest rate swaps, etc. Of course, you focus more on FRA, IRS, interest rate swap and interest rate futures, and options, everything. In alternate investment, it is important that you know and focus on PE and hedge funds, their fee structures, and their digital assets. Ethics, all the standards are important, including GIPS. So here's there's nothing which you can leave out. Portfolio management, the most important and the most challenging ones are portfolio risk return part 1 and part 2, and there's a topic which is talking about behavioral biases. These topics are the most important one, so if you're short of time and if you're closer to the exam, make sure you go through these topics at least. In corporate issuer, chapter number 2 and chapter number 3, you need to read everything. Chapter number 4, you just need to read managing working capital and liquidity part. And chapter number 5 and 6, again, you need to read everything. That means you can skip chapter number 1 if you want. Economics, everything is important except chapter number 2 and chapter number 5. Especially the microeconomics part, because they have summarized everything into one chapter. So make sure you're reading the microeconomics part thoroughly well. Quants, now that you've learned very well fixed income, equity and derivatives, understanding chapter 1 and chapter number 2 pretty much becomes very easy for you. So you can just go through that a little easily. Chapter number 3 talks about skewness, kurtosis and correlation. This is very important for you to understand because it kind of helps you understand the rest of the topics. In chapter number 4, expected value and Bayes theorem, and the remaining topics are equally important. Again, I have tried to reduce the entire 100% of syllabus to roughly around 75 to 80%. I hope this helps you. And by the way, don't forget, the last 5 days, remember to do the summary notes and also read the ethics. And if you have done this thing enough well, you probably can go and nail that exam and hope that you pass with a sufficiently enough margin in your result. All the best.